Have you ever wondered how genetic information is passed from one generation to the next? And why do some children closely resemble their parents, while others do not? Hello, my name is Ron McNeil. I'll be your host as we explore the genetics of inherited traits.
The following program is brought to you by the Center for Educational Outreach at Baylor College of Medicine.
The human species. We all share certain characteristics that identify us as humans, characteristics that make us different from other living organisms. But look a little closer. Although humans have similar characteristics, or traits, we also possess traits that make each of us unique. These unique traits include such things as different eye color, skin color, hair coarseness, height, and body type. Our differences in appearance, along with other unique traits, are called variations. Of course, members of the same family tend to look more alike and share more visible traits than non-family members do. Family members also can share less visible traits, such as a tendency to have high blood pressure, diabetes, and heart disease. Why? Because we inherit our traits from our parents. But although offspring usually display similar traits to their parents, they can also exhibit traits different from either parent. To demonstrate how offspring inherit traits from their parents, we will look at the dominant recessive model of inheritance. Just know that there are other models of inheritance. To understand how inherited traits are passed on, let's start with a look into the human cell. Amazingly, the nucleus of almost every cell in your body holds a complete set of your genetic information. This set of genetic information is called your genome. It consists of long individual strands of deoxyribonucleic acid, a molecule more commonly known as DNA. When cells are not dividing, these individual DNA strands are relaxed and spread over the entire nucleus. But when a cell is preparing to divide, each DNA strand coils tightly to form a chromosome, which can be seen through a light microscope. Keep in mind that each chromosome is a separate strand of DNA. Since there are normally 46 strands of DNA in the nucleus of most human cells, it is logical that we also have 46 chromosomes. Examination of a graph of a nucleus containing these 46 chromosomes reveals that 44 of our chromosomes can be arranged into 22 similar pairs based on their length and appearance. These are called homologous pairs of chromosomes. Also, they're known as autosomes. These paired chromosomes are not involved in determining sex or gender. Each homologous pair of chromosomes not only has the same length and appearance, but the pair also contains the same genes, which we will learn about shortly. So far, we have accounted for 44 of the 46 chromosomes. The remaining two are the X and Y chromosomes, our sex chromosomes. Certain combination of these two chromosomes determine a person's gender. XX for a female and XY for a male. So in total, humans have 22 pairs of homologous chromosomes and 2 individual sex chromosomes. Where did these homologous chromosomes come from? We inherit 1 chromosome in each homologous pair from our mother, the other from our father. Similarly, we inherit 1 sex chromosome from each of our parents. In other words, our 46 chromosomes are actually 2 sets of 23 chromosomes, a maternal set from our mother and a paternal set from our father. The picture display of the homologous pairs of chromosomes arranged from the longest pair to the shortest, plus the two sex chromosomes, is called a karyotype. A karyotype is useful in medical genetics to identify any extra or missing chromosomes. Cells collected through a medical procedure called an amniocentesis can be used to prepare a karyotype. A karyotype is beneficial to the physician in determining chromosomal number abnormalities such as Down's syndrome. Now let's think about what happens to our chromosomes during reproduction. If both the mother's and the father's cells have 46 chromosomes, you would expect the joining of the mother's and the father's chromosomes during reproduction to produce an offspring with 92 chromosomes. But this doesn't happen due to a special process that occurs during the formation of the reproductive cells, or gametes. The gametes, the female egg and the male sperm, are formed by a special cell division process known as meiosis. Cell division through meiosis reduces by half the number of chromosomes in each resulting cell and is different from mitosis, which creates two identical cells with the same chromosome number as the parent cell. Meiosis, also called reduction division, randomly takes only one chromosome from each of the 22 homologous pairs of chromosomes and one sex chromosome to form the egg in the female. This same process occurs for the sperm in the male. This means that each resulting egg or sperm has a single set of 23 chromosomes. During fertilization, the female egg and the sperm join. Each contributes its 23 chromosomes, resulting in a fertilized egg with a total of 46 chromosomes. Thanks to meiosis, each parent contributes half of the chromosomes to the newly created offspring, therefore maintaining the original chromosome number in the species. Let's take a more detailed look at the chromosome. Remember those long DNA strands that make up the chromosomes? Throughout each strand are sections of DNA called genes. Each gene contains the instructions for our traits. In other words, instructions to build the parts of the body and to run the chemical reactions required by the body. These instructions consist of a specific sequence of molecule building blocks for the DNA that constitutes each gene. There is another class of molecules, ribonucleic acid or RNA, that copies the DNA instructions of a gene and uses it to manufacture the proteins for our body. Proteins run the chemical reactions required by the body and are also part of the structural components of the body. Each gene contains the instructions for one specific protein. Each gene also has a specific location, or locus, on a chromosome. Since chromosomes come in pairs, genes come in pairs. For every gene located on one chromosome of a homologous pair, there is a companion gene at the same location on the other chromosome of the pair. Do you remember the origin for each chromosome of a homologous pair? One comes from the mother, the other from the father. This means that there are two forms for each gene, one inherited from the mother, the other from the father. These alternate forms of a gene on a homologous pair of chromosomes are called alleles. The allele forms may be the same or they may be different. It is the specific combination of these allele forms that determines the genetic makeup for a particular trait. This is called the genotype. Your genotype determines your phenotype, or trait expression, for that particular gene. One way to remember the definition of phenotype is to think of the phenotype as the physical appearance of a particular gene. The phenotype may be visible, such as eye color or hair color, or it may be less obvious when involving conditions such as diabetes or high blood pressure. To illustrate how an offspring inherits traits from his or her parents, we will use the dominant recessive model of inheritance and apply it to the trait of freckles. Just be aware that there are other inheritance models. In our model, an allele form of a gene can either be dominant or recessive. In the case of a dominant allele form, a person only needs one copy of this allele form in the genotype for the trait to be fully expressed. Dominant alleles are usually represented by an uppercase letter, so we'll use an uppercase F to indicate the phenotype of freckles. In the case of a recessive allele form, the recessive trait will only be expressed if there is a recessive allele form on each chromosome of the homologous pair. Recessive alleles are usually represented by a lowercase letter. In our example, a lowercase f will indicate an allele with no freckles. Don't forget, the combination of allele forms for a particular gene is its genotype. The genotype determines the phenotype or physical appearance. In our example, the presence or absence of freckles. One possible combination of allele forms for a gene is homozygous, meaning both allele forms are the same. The homozygous genotype combination would possess either two copies of the dominant allele or two copies of the recessive allele. If the offspring have two copies of the dominant allele, they are homozygous dominant and will express the dominant trait. In our example, this homozygous combination would be represented by two uppercase Fs and result in a phenotype of freckles. On the other hand, if the offspring have two copies of the recessive allele for a genotype, they are homozygous recessive and will express the recessive trait. This would be represented by two lowercase f's, and this combination would not result in freckles. A second possible combination of alleles is heterozygous, meaning two different allele forms. The heterozygous genotype would possess one dominant allele and one recessive allele. This would be represented by one uppercase and one lowercase f in our freckle example. Remember, the presence of just one dominant allele results in the dominant trait. An offspring with the heterozygous genotype would possess the freckle phenotype. Now you should be able to better understand how offspring inherit traits similar to their parents. But how can offspring possess traits that are different from either parent? Let's see if we can answer this question by returning to our example of freckles. Suppose both parents possess the freckle phenotype, but one of their offspring does not have freckles. This is an example of a unique trait for that offspring. How does this happen? To begin, let's suppose that both the mother and the father have the heterozygous genotype. We would write this genotype as one uppercase and one lowercase f. From this information, we know that the allele combination for the freckle gene for both mother and father is one dominant and one recessive allele. According to our model of inheritance, both would have freckles because of the presence of one dominant allele. If you will remember from our meiosis discussion, one chromosome from each homologous pair is randomly selected for egg formation, and the same is true for sperm formation. Based on the parent's genotype for freckles, each parent will contribute either a dominant allele or a recessive allele to the respective gamete. For freckles, we would represent this by indicating that each parent would contribute either an uppercase F allele or a lowercase f allele. Imagine a tic-tac-toe grid. Knowing that the possible allele choices for each gamete from each parent are either a dominant or recessive allele, let's first place the allele choices for the female egg in the first column. The first space is blank, and the second and third spaces contain the uppercase F allele and the lowercase f allele, respectively. Now let's place the male allele choices for the sperm in the top row with the uppercase F allele in the second space and the lowercase f allele in the third space. You may recognize this as a Punnett square. This is a common tool used by geneticists to predict the possible allele genotype combinations and possible phenotypes between parents of known genotype. When fertilization occurs, one of the two possible alleles from the mother joins with one of the two possible alleles from the father. Let's say the female egg and the male sperm both contain the dominant allele, represented by an uppercase F allele. Fertilization would result in an offspring with two dominant alleles, represented by two uppercase Fs. This resulting genotype is homozygous dominant and results in an offspring with the phenotype of freckles. Another possible combination involves a gamete with a dominant allele from one parent and a gamete with a recessive allele from the other parent. This resulting offspring would have the heterozygous genotype. In our example, this would be represented by one uppercase and one lowercase f. Because of the presence of one dominant allele, this offspring would have the phenotype of freckles. There is one other possible combination. The female egg and the male sperm could each contribute a recessive allele, represented by two lowercase f's. This fertilization would result in the homozygous recessive genotype, and the offspring would not have freckles. Even though both parents have the phenotype of freckles, it is possible for these parents to produce an offspring without freckles. This offspring would be unique from either parent for this trait. Therefore, it is possible for offspring to exhibit traits that are not present in either parent. This completes our exploration into the genetics of inherited traits. Now you should have all of the information you need to answer the questions posed at the beginning. How is genetic information passed from one generation to the next? And why do some children closely resemble their parents, while others do not? I thank you for joining us and hope the information provided is useful to you. Until next time, so long.